This is The Right Approach. I'm JW Judge. For those of you watching at home, you'll see that I don't yet have my co-host Barbara Hinsky with me. When we recorded this episode with Tiffany Yates Martin, we did things a little bit out of order. We jumped right into our conversation. I didn't want to interrupt that conversation and the flow of it to do these introductions, so I'm adding it in later. As you know, this is The Right Approach. This is a podcast for writers to learn more about the craft and business of writing as we explore a new topic every week. Our guest today, as I already mentioned, is Tiffany Yates Martin. She is a developmental editor at Fox Print Editorial. She is the author of the book Intuitive Editing. She also writes articles for Reader's Digest and Jane Friedman. She was with us for episode 36 when we talked about writing effective dialogue. She is back today to talk about finding satisfaction in the writing process and having what my football coach called stick-to-itiveness in those periods where the writing isn't coming easily. So without anything further, we will just jump right into this conversation with Tiffany.
Thanks, guys. This is fun to do again.
Yeah, I'm glad it worked out. And I'm glad you sent out that newsletter that we're going to talk about, because that was good times.
Yeah. Oh, the Reese Witherspoon or the Embrace the Suck?
The Embrace the Suck.
Oh, yeah.
And the Reese Witherspoon. They were both great. Yeah.
Thank you. I was going through the Embrace the Suck, just rereading it and going to all the links I posted. And I'm like, damn, I talk about this a lot. So this is one of my favorite topics.
It was so helpful to me because I was spending, way too much time on a presentation. And it was just churning. It was fine. And
yeah, that's the thing. It's fine.
It's great. It's fine. And it went very well. An extra 2 hours would have been completely shredded time. No.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's just hard. It's funny. I'm working on a new blog post about letting go because I think I hear from authors a lot. They don't know when it's actually finished, which kind of ties into what you're saying. Like at a certain point, I think you have to just decide. Never. Right. It is what it is. This is as good as I'm going to do at this point moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And giving yourself permission.
Yeah.
Well, let's just keep talking about this instead of me interrupting it all and doing an intro, and I can go ahead and add that later. So let's talk about knowing when something's done, or actually it may not be done, deciding when you are done with something.
Yeah.
So let's start with there.
Yeah. Done is a decision.
Done is a decision. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, I think it's really easy to noodle on it forever. And I think that has to do with perfectionism. I think it has to do with fear sometimes, fear of success, fear of failure. I think it has to do with the sense, these are all, it's funny, we were just talking about how when you guys approached me about this blog post, I started reviewing it and looking at the ones I always link to in the blog post. And so many of them link to what I call the demons, which is pretty much everything I'm saying right now, perfectionism, competition, imposter syndrome, whatever it is. Once you let the thing go, all of that is out of your control. So I think there's some illusion of control in continuing to hold on to it. And also, that holy grail promise that I will make this thing perfect. And then all the things I want to happen for it will happen for it. But this is a subjective field and we can't know that. And I think when we get bogged down in trying to do that, we're hanging ourselves up on this one project, this one part of our creative life, and keeping ourselves from growing and expanding and moving on. Sometimes it's just good enough. And you go, like you said, Barbara, you just decide, I'm done now.
I mean, honestly, I've never, I don't do book readings of my own books very often, but when I do, I hate to do them. I hate to read from my works because I always feel like I want to have a red pen in my hand and stop and circle stuff. And you can't, it is done. And I think as you grow and as times change, you're always going to think of a better word or
well, that's the thing. If you can't, then you've stagnated, right? So it's actually a good sign, I think, to go back to your old stuff and be able to go, gosh, I would do this differently. I can make this better now. But it was a snapshot of who you were as an artist at the time, and that is valid and it's good enough. I mean, it's all part of the process. I look as a author, I've published 6 books under a pen name, and Phoebe Fox. I'm not being cryptic. I just don't really write fiction anymore. But every single one of them, with the exception of the fourth book in a series, which I knew was one book too far, but I was contracted for it. Every single one of them gets better and better and better. And I go back to the early ones now and I'm like,
Yes.
like you said, I wish I could fix that. But
Mhm.
it is what it is, or I guess more appropriately, it is what it was. And that's not where I am anymore. So move forward. Don't get stuck where you are.
Yeah.
And I think so many, and you've already talked about a number of them, but so many of the things that get us stuck are within our own head. They aren't the
Mhm.
external environmental things. They are where we get ourselves stuck. And, you mentioned perfectionism, and I do not suffer from perfectionism. I am very much in the good enough camp, but my wife is an admitted perfectionist, and
Yeah.
it gets her tripped up on stuff. And because she doesn't have the capacity to say it's good enough
Mm.
unless it's perfect. And I think there's a lot of writers that control it, but one of the things that does affect me less now, but is the fear of rejection that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I'd written a couple of nonfiction books for lawyers, and I had an idea for a fourth book about lawyers who are doing creative work, some within the practice of law, some as side hustles, some for lawyers who had given it up and were doing something else. But it was going to require me to do a lot of interviews, and the fear of being told no or that people weren't interested hung me up for a while. In addition to being an introvert and not super enthusiastic about reaching out about those things anyway, but ultimately, I forced myself into it by launching my first podcast for lawyers, and then knowing that I listen to a ton of podcasts, and people are going to be way more inclined to spend time talking with me if it's in that format rather than just for a prospective book that may or may not ever see the world. And so I forced myself into that. And I will say, I sent out tons of invites that went into the void and I never heard back, or that I got no's on. But you kind of get desensitized to it, and that's what I needed. Whether it was for that or for later, I would get into fiction writing, and I did a couple rounds of querying for projects, and all of those things. You're either going to be told no or not told anything when you put yourself out there.
Or
But
yes, you may get a
and
yes,
you might get
but it's
yes.
equally likely as the no or the
Mhm.
radio silence.
Yes.
Mhm.
And so, I just got a little more comfortable with it, and it was okay. And you know what? None of them were personally devastating in a way that I couldn't recover from. It was all right.
I love that you say that, because I think all of our fears, and this is one of the coping devices that I realized, Barbara, you and I were just talking about. I write about this a lot because it's a big part of writers' lives. The
Mhm.
craft part of it is huge, but the psyche part of it is huge too. And Jeremy, I think you hit right on it when you said that these hangups we have, they're not coming from some external place. They're most of the time they're coming from inside of us. And when they're not, when they are coming from the work itself, that's a solvable problem. But the
Mhm.
internal stuff is also a solvable problem if we go about it in certain ways. So I love that you say you had these fears of doing exactly what you then just dived into the deep end of doing with the podcast. What made you
Mhm.
realize you had to force yourself into the thing that you were afraid of? And how did you find the fortitude to do that?
Mhm.
So I undulate between overconfidence and like crippling anxiety. And so
So
I
you're
had
an
to swing
artist.
back and forth. Yeah, yeah. So I swing back and forth. And I guess in the moment when I decided to do that, it was probably the abundance of confidence speaking. It was something that I was interested in doing anyway. And I don't, I mean, nobody likes being uncomfortable, but there are times that I'll go out of my way to make myself uncomfortable to do something, whether that's healthy or not. is a different discussion.
No, I think
But
that's where growth is. You know, if
Yeah.
growth were comfortable, I don't ever think it is. I think we have to push ourselves, and that's how you do, and that's how you get better. It's how you expand.
And Jeremy, you're a doer. You're always,
mm,
I think your default setting is to do something. You know, I have served you now, or what? I've known you for what, 3 years now? We've been doing a podcast for almost 2. You don't get stuck in neutral. You'll
Mm.
kick it into gear and get going.
Is that different for you, Barbara?
No, I'm a doer too. Even if I don't know where I'm going or what I'm really supposed to be doing, I will force myself to take some kind of action to move forward.
I think if we can like talk about how you guys both, well, you are by nature doers. I also am by nature a doer, but I also am full of fear, like most of us, you know,
Oh,
and I've
yeah.
got more
I'm
than
very
my healthy
fearless.
share of demons.
Yeah.
So I think it's the leaning into that that's maybe something that would be helpful for authors, because we're not all doers. And Jeremy,
Mhm.
as you said, not that it's necessarily apples, apples and apples, but if you are an introvert, as many artists or at least writers tend to be, that can even be harder to push into that. So yeah, you guys are doers, but you're still fearful of this thing. I have my coping devices for that push me forward, feel the fear and do it anyway.
Mhm.
How do y'all do that?
I am an internally motivated and ambitious person.
Mhm.
I try to keep those ambitions healthy, but I am. And so that is what drives the doing. Um, and I did, I wouldn't know how to turn that off if I needed to.
Yeah.
And so that is what, you know, that's what drives it. And I definitely experience fear along the way. And even in my writing, even in my fiction writing, I know that well, aside from work being extraordinarily busy for the last like 8 months, and it's not slowing down, it's getting busier. So when I have make the time to write, I know that when I'm hung up on writing and not moving a story forward, that too is not out of some abstract form of writer's block. It is very specific, and it's a fear about what I need to write next and a discomfort. Not, and most recently, I had to kill a character that I liked, and it was necessary, and it was going to be kind of ugly, and I didn't particularly want to do it. And so I did a lot of editing and a lot of fiddling around with other things that were not writing in the time that I designated for writing because I didn't want to do it. And
Mhm.
I can point to every time that I've had
Procrastination. Another
yeah,
deal.
I can point to that fear or discomfort or not wanting to
Yeah.
do a particular thing in the story every time that I'm not doing.
All right. I'm writing things down furiously as you talk because you're saying so many things that are making things explode in my head. I love that twice now you have said discomfort. I wrote a whole blog post about tolerating discomfort because, as we were saying a second ago, Barbara, Jeremy, I think you have to. I think you have to be able to feel that and continue to move forward, because the only other option is stasis, stagnation.
Hang
Mhm.
on, I need to pause this for just a second.
So let's just pick up from that, I guess.
Yeah, that's great.
So even when you're feeling that discomfort, I feel like you have to push yourself out of it. And you also said a couple of times, Jeremy, you're internally motivated. I think that's one of the keys to it.
Mhm.
Even if you're not by nature an internally motivated person, um, although I kind of think we all are. I think that's the
Mhm.
key, not only to being able to move forward with your career, but to being happy with your career. To
Mm.
know, I call it knowing your why. I know that's not original at all, but I think a lot of times we do know our why when we get into this, because we love stories, we love words, we love
Mhm.
books, we want to make them, we want to bring life to all these worlds in our head. And then it's really easy to lose sight of that in the chaos of what actually trying to publish, if that's what your goal is, entails. Or even if it's not, if you just want to create a finished product, it's more than just, oh, let me sit down in my little attic hideaway and create, because there's so many more steps to like editing it, revising it. And that's even before you decide whether you want to get it out in the world, approach agents, publishers, market it. All of that, I think, is easy to lose sight of the reason that we were drawn into this in the first place. And then we get focused on the product, not the process. And that's, I think, when work does become a slog. I wrote in the post you guys liked, I wrote about the fact that I was up against a deadline while I was having the suck at that point. I was writing for Writer's Digest. I had an article that when I pitched it, I was really excited about the topic, as I almost always am, because I like to explore them and sort of, break apart the sausage and see how it's made. And then you get in it, and there's always this phase for me where it doesn't matter what I'm creating, any content creation, of course, an article, slideshow, presentation, speech, where I get enmeshed in the suck. Like, there is a stage at which the whole thing feels like this sticky chaos of garbage. I have no idea where it's going. I have no idea how to fix it. And I wonder why I said yes to this thing and don't know how I'm ever going to make sense of it. But I've come to realize, after doing it enough times and realizing that it always gets where it needs to go. Like, Barbara, you were talking about good enough.
Yeah.
Or, being able to let go of something. At a certain point, I realize it doesn't have to be the be all, end all, most original, most enlightening thing every author has ever seen and changed their writing lives, because I think that was the bar I was holding up for myself as a perfectionist. But you can unlearn that, Jeremy, to you and your wife's point about each of you being a little different. And that is my number one demon. And I have begun to unlearn it. That doesn't mean I don't feel it every time, but I've learned ways to remind myself that chaos is just normal. Like, if you think about building a house, or right now, the trainer who owns the gym where I work out, they're moving from a smaller space to a bigger space, and it is mass chaos, and he's so stressed out. And we were talking about the fact that at a certain point, it just seems like this big mess that he should never have taken on. But you do one thing and then another and then another, and before you know it, you're there and it's working, and the place is on its feet. It's the same thing with all the course creation or the content creation I do, or with writing a story. If you are building anything, say you're building a house, construction's messy. And you're not going to get in there and go, oh, this looks just like my dreams. You're going to be like, oh my God, the bathroom's in a weird place, and this is never going to work in 3 dimensions the way I thought it did in 2 dimensions. It's not till you actually start to move through it and get it closer to finished that you can see the shape of what it's going to be. And the only way through it is through it, which doesn't mean like bear down harder when you're having these struggles, because I think that can be counterproductive. It means find the coping devices that you need. And I personally have a whole mess of them. I'm sure y'all do too. We can talk about those that help remind you that this is normal, that give you a little space from it so you can stop lashing yourself with a whip of whatever your demon is. It's not good enough. It's not perfect. Who do I think I am? Whatever, oh my God, it's going to be rejected. You got to let go of that and just get back to that core reason of, what am I trying to accomplish here and why? Like, why did I want to do this? And that's how I finally got several ways. How I got through the suck of what I was writing was accepted that this is normal. Realized I always pull it off. It may not be the greatest thing ever, but it's always serviceable. I have never completely dropped the ball and turned out a complete piece of garbage that could help no one. And just reminding myself of that is helpful. And then I can start to go through what I actually have on the page and just keep plowing forward with the mess and not judge it, which lets me just go. And somewhere in there, the thoughts start to form, because I'm free associating. I'm finding what my thoughts are. I'm formulating them as I go through that. And then I can sift through and go, what threads are useful here? But if you're not getting something on the page, you have nothing to work with, nothing to fix.
Yeah,
and I'd like to hop in and give you some feedback, because when your blog appears in my mailbox, it is a drop everything and read it. I think they are so well written and so helpful, just like your one about Reese Witherspoon that came through this morning was just brilliant, and it helps me
Oh, thank you.
in
That means
very
so much.
concrete ways. And you need to know that. And I'm kicking myself. I should have taken the time to email you and tell you this. We never
Oh,
do
but that's the
that.
thing. Like, it's
Um,
great to have those cookies, and you can't imagine how much that means to me. Thank you, because
well,
everything I do is invested in helping authors. But
it does.
and it's really helpful to hear that, and it's lovely to hear it. But also, it's okay if you don't, and you have to find ways to get through that. But I will tell you, comments like this, here's another of my coping devices. I call it the cookie file because I like cookies and they're delicious.
Yeah,
And sometimes you just really need a cookie. But if you only eat cookies, it's not
absolutely.
good for you. So I keep this little file of happy compliments that mean a lot
Yes.
to me. And if I'm really in the pits and I can't pull myself out of it, I go read some cookies because I
And-
don't want to live there. That's like really self-absorbed. But when you need it, everybody needs that
yeah.
sometimes.
I think everybody needs, I've got an encouragement file, and I keep those kinds of back from the days when I was a lawyer, even. And as Jeremy knows, as lawyers, you don't get too many of those people, just don't think
You don't get a lot of
it's real
love.
important to show love to us. And so we don't get much
Yeah.
of that. I want to just comment real quickly, and then I'm going to let Jeremy come back in. But I find during this perfectionist phase, it is also, there's so much involved, whether you're traditionally published or independently published. There is just there are so many rabbit holes you can go down to procrastinate. Social media, on and on and on.
Research with air
Research,
quotes.
research, and it's sort of the author equivalent of alphabetizing your spices.
Yes.
When you're doing that, okay, you're done. There's no universe in which that really needs to be made a priority, and something else needs to be moved aside so you can do this. So I try, and that's one of my little coping techniques. I'm working on something like, are you alphabetizing your spices, which might not be the way, but once they're done, you can kind of keep them up. And then I say, okay, yes, you are. Time to forcibly move on. And sometimes you have to force yourself. Jeremy, what do you think?
And I wanted to go back to this topic of understanding your purpose and knowing your why, because it's something that has come up for us in episode 64 with Yasmin Anjo, and then more recently in episode 67 with Kyla Zhao. Um, this topic came up,
I
and
love
it's
her.
it's perpetual, and it's so important. And for me, I mentioned in that interview with Kyla that I have been asked by people like, why can't you just be a lawyer? Why do you have you have all these other fires going? And I didn't have an answer for that. I mean, I specifically remember in 2018 that I was asked that question, and I didn't have an answer that I could articulate. And so I went on a journey of self discovery, which can sound really, I don't know, woo woo. And
No, we're all artists here, baby.
yeah,
That's our bread and
Yeah,
butter.
but
yeah.
I started reading about the Enneagram, which is a personality typing system. And there are many, and some people find value in them and others don't. But the way that it expressed things helped me identify some aspects of my personality, um, that gave me answers and words to answer questions that I didn't have before, and helped me understand my purpose. And the purpose that I have in my legal career is very different from the purpose I have for my writing career. And they have some things in common, but they exhibit and express very different sides of me and my personality and what I want to see come out of it. And the thing that keeps driving them forward are very different things. And so I think it's really important to know that reason. And it may not be that somebody ever asked you, why is writing or creativity in whatever form that it takes for you important? And why is that something you put so much effort and energy into? But even if it's just for you yourself to be able to
Yeah.
know and sustain you in those hard moments, and sometimes it's not
Mhm.
moments, sometimes it's hard seasons,
Yeah.
that that can give you the life you need to persevere.
So I love everything you just said. This is a career where for most of us, it's at best a series of ups and downs, right? You can, even if you're on top of the world, you get the 6-figure advance, you're sold at auction, your book doesn't perform the way they want it to, you might be dropped right away. You might lose your publisher, your editor, you might lose your agent, you might, they want you to change your name, even if you're not published yet, you might have one manuscript where you think, I got it. And the next one, just, you want to blow your head off. So I think there's so much in this business that's outside of our control as the artist. It's one of my gripes about any creative industry, that the artist is so often the one who benefits the least and has the least control over it. But there are things. So this is what I think makes writing so hard, is when we are trying to, when we put our happiness and our satisfaction and fulfillment in what we do in the hands of things that we do not control, there is no world in which we're going to find fulfillment in this career. But most of us love this and we want to do it for our whole lives long. So we have to embrace the things that we do have control over. And that's the creative impulse. That's our creative product. That's what we do with it. And that's the why that I think is important to stay in touch with. I think so often we think, oh, I'm going to be a New York Times bestselling author. I'm going to, have a book a year. And then I always say to authors, play that out. Like, what does that actually look like? It's a great goal to think about. But let's think about what it entails. It entails making this much money, because we all know book advances are fairly low and you're going to get paid 3 times over the course of what? Year and a half, couple of years. Can't really live on that most of the time for most advances. While that's happening, you're not only going to have to write, if you want to say be a book a year or stay in the public eye, you're going to have to write a lot of books. You're also going to have to spend a lot of time doing marketing, platform building. What does that look like? How does that fit into the rest of your life? Does that, which is going to be your day-to-day reality, feel like something you're going to enjoy? And if the answer is yes, fantastic. Then you're going to be happy in this career. And if the answer is no, what are the things that do make you happy about this that you can not lose sight of and focus your energy on? Because it's not always, like I said, it's not always the product of this thing that is what provides satisfaction. So often I think the original impulse for most of us is the love of the thing, the love of the craft, the love of the word, the love of story. And I'm not saying give up on those dreams, but I'm saying don't define your success or happiness as an artist by them, because you're guaranteeing that you're basically giving over control of your satisfaction in life to factors, to everyone else but you, and factors you don't control.
Mm-hmm.
You talked a little bit, Jeremy, about actually articulating that. I literally every year, I have a mission statement and I re-examine it every year. And I always encourage authors to do that for themselves, just like businesses would, because it does, not only does it keep you focused on that why, the thing that you're in this for doing, but it also focuses you in those demon moments, those blocked moments, because, like, for example, with my article that I was blocked on, or whatever I happen to be blocked on, generally I've gotten hung up, like I said, on the effect of it. Is this going to am I going to look like an idiot? Are people going to go, you don't know what you're talking about? That's imposter syndrome. Is it not going to be good enough? That's perfectionism. Are other people presenting this better than me? That's competition. So all the demons are there. And the solution to almost every time to that is so that's defining what I'm doing from the outside in. So the solution is to come from the inside out and go, wait a minute, what is it I want out of this? And that comes back to my mission statement. I want to educate and empower authors. I don't remember exactly what it is, but it has to do with educating and empowering authors in the fields, not only of craft, but in writing life and writing business, because I do think all of those are sort of connected in creating a meaningful writing career for ourselves. And if I keep coming back to that internal motivation, I get back on track. I take all that noise that's generally what's blocking me. And I don't believe in writer's block as this like unknown external affliction that descends upon us. There's always a reason for it. And it's probably usually coming from something inside that you are misdefining, misunderstanding, or focusing on in the wrong way, like I just described I did when I was focusing externally. So if you can always come back to that why, that mission statement, that's, I think, what gets you through all of it, the individual writer's blocked moments and the long-term ups and downs of what can be a very challenging career, but a rewarding one too.
Well, and I know
Absolutely.
Barbara said this, and I want to reiterate it, that if that is your mission statement, you are achieving it from my perspective of where I sit. And I know that when I see an article come through with your name on it, I know that I'm going to read it. Whereas there are plenty of other people that I might skip it, but if it has your name attached to it, I'm going to read it because it's going to have value for me and aid me in my writing. So as we bring this to a close, I want to make sure people know where to find you and where to find that helpful content, advice, those things that you're producing for us.
Thank you both. This whole thing's going in the cookie file and I will revisit it because really this means the world. Like it just means the world. Thank you. So the best place is probably foxprinteditorial.com. That's where you'll find my book, Intuitive Editing. You'll also find it wherever you buy books. And then there's a ton of resources on there for authors, and most of them, most of them are free. There's a lot of downloadables that can be helpful, self-editing checklist, a beta reader template, how to find and vet an editor. And then I've got recommendations of podcasts and other resources I find helpful. I've got online courses on there, all my socials on there, and the weekly blog, which, as you said, Jeremy and Barbara both, it covers pretty much all the areas we've talked about. I talk about craft sometimes, I talk about writing life, I talk about writing business, and you can opt in to have that as a newsletter, or you can just visit it on the website.
Thank you so much. This was inspiring and uplifting, and I can't wait to get it out to people so that they can hear it as well.
Thanks. I love this topic.
We just didn't even scratch the surface.
No. Well, it's funny. I'm writing a book about all of this. Like my follow-up book to Intuitive Editing is about all this stuff we're talking about. I call it the squishy parts of a writing career. It's not the hard skills. It's these soft skills that are the engine of being able to sustain this career and be happy doing it. So I love talking about this and I love y'all's insights on it.
Well, let's do this again then, as they say.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Thank you both.
Great.